Welcome to Salam's weekly Salam's Islamic Center weekly Seerah Series, walking in the footsteps of the walking Qur'an, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's going to be every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Today we have a wonderful guest, Sadeq Ansari, all the way from Australia. Thank you for being with us, Sadeq.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And could you please tell a little bit about yourself, and then we go on with the topic. We'll have the Q&A at 3:40, and then 20 minutes for the questions and answers. Please, the floor is yours.
I'm just a citizen of Australia. They call it Down Under. I'm studying my PhD right now at Charles Sturt University, and I'm doing it on the Hadith collections, particularly on the works of an Egyptian scholar of the 3rd century after Hijrah, the Islamic calendar, a scholar called Abu Tahawi. And I'm studying his work and about particularly meta-analysis, content criticism of Hadith, and how did Muslim scholars, particularly Imam Tahawi, address content criticism when Hadith appears to contradict with reason and with other empirical evidence. And I'm just trying to finish that. So a student.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's it's a lifelong process that you're doing, I suppose. You also studied for many years here in the US. Now you moved to Australia, I suppose, last year. So the floor is yours. Please go ahead, Sadeq.
Thank you. I've been honored to have been asked to speak this inaugural series, inshallah, discussing our dear life of the Prophet, dear Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I'm just going to discuss as if I'm discussing with my brothers and sisters as if they're here. We are hearing the difficulties that our friends in America are going through with the spread of this virus, and you're all in our prayers. I know when I was in America, everyone was making prayers for Australia due to the bushfires. Now it's our turn to pray for America and for all of humanity. This incident is something that really reminds us of our humbleness of being a human being. I hope that every human being can be able to reduce their arrogance a bit with this incident, humble down, and particularly in this month of Ramadan, turn to God more in prayer and in supplication. And I need this advice myself first. I'm very unfit to speak on this topic, but I couldn't turn it down. The book has been an amazing book. I have read it and I've seen parts of the book in audio format. The Messenger of God, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I just want to share, I personally assume that our readers, our audience today have read the chapter, but I've been informed that that may not have been the case with everyone. So the notes that I prepared and what I want to share over the next few minutes is some of my reflections about this chapter of the book, the very first chapter. And as I share with that reflections, please excuse it if I've assumed that you've read it. I will try to put it in context in any way if you haven't, and hopefully you can read it afterwards. And then in future weeks, hopefully, inshallah, you could come to the lecture having read it. The author mentions that he does not want to begin by talking a lot about negativity or what's evil, particularly when we have a chance to speak about what's good and what's beautiful. There's no need to speak about evil, but sometimes to really understand the context of someone, of anyone, it is really important to know what type of a life they lived in, particularly when it comes to our Prophet ﷺ. We need to know where he lived, how it was the context, and that's why this book, the chapter, does begin about Arabia before the arrival of the Prophet ﷺ and how it was. In Islamic terminology, this is normally called the era of Jahiliyyah, the period of ignorance. Inshallah. I would like to begin my discussion just with a small prayer. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. طب القلوب ودوائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Now, one thing about the book that I think it's important for everyone to keep in mind is that this book was not actually authored with an author sitting behind a table writing it down. It was collected from a series of lectures given, I believe, in the late 1980s. And these lectures were compiled and made into a book form. And it is amazing because despite it being from audio lectures, it really flows and it reads very well. And I guess that's a thing with good orators, that sometimes their speeches can easily be converted into articles and chapters of books. And this has been the case with this book as well. So for the reader, it's beneficial to keep that in mind, that sometimes you are listening to someone that was saying this in a minbar on the pulpit in the mosque. So we said about the book begins by analyzing the era of Jahiliyyah, the era of ignorance. And please excuse me as I turn to my notes here and there. The area of Arabian Peninsula before the arrival of Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, yes, it's known for Jahiliyyah. It was known by a few things that characterizes it. A, it was surrounded, and idol worship was quite dominant. Although Arabia, particularly the city of Mecca, Muslims believe there are biblical sources referring to this as well, is a place where Abraham, the Prophet Abraham, came and he settled with his wife Hagar, and they established a city with his son Ismail. By the time it came to the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was filled with idols. But idolatry wasn't just the least, was not the worst thing there. The society itself was also very, from what we hear from reports, quite, let's say, use the word backward, evil, not very merciful. In any given society, the ultimate litmus test to see if that society supports ethics and morality or not is to see how the weak, the minority, are treated in that society. And definitely Arabian Peninsula in the 5th and 6th centuries before the Prophet ﷺ was not a place welcoming the weak, whether it be slaves, whether it be African slaves from Africa that was brought in through slavery, whether it was other slaves from Arabia around the Arabian Peninsula, whether we're talking about the treatment of women, of children, of any weak societies, weak categories in society, they were not treated very well. And we know this because, in fact, the Arabs had a custom where they would even bury their daughters alive. Daughters were seen as a source of shame. The Qur'an refers to this very explicitly. It says, and when any one of you are given the news, I'm just paraphrasing, of a girl, their face is blackened with despair and with sadness, as if it's a source of embarrassment. The Quran is mentioning this, criticizing these attitudes. But I'm just saying this to show that in terms of belief, paganism was quite widespread, but also social customs were quite, not supporting morality, social ethics. And then also when we talk about issues of ethics of personal morality or sexual morality, Arabia is described to be very promiscuous in terms of sexual ethics, not very, chastity was not perhaps very well celebrated. Now, having kept that in mind, this does not go to say that the whole society was full of evil and there was no good. In fact, this really happens. Even in the most evil societies, we do find examples of good. And it's good to keep this in mind because the Arabs, although they had these things of pagan worship and things like female infanticide, they also had other positive things. And I'd just like to mention for the reader to keep in mind, they used to love generosity and they used to praise that. So that was known. And those who worked towards peace, that was known. And there were also people of integrity when it came to words. And in this society, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he's born to a family who plays a very important role. He was born to the Hashimi family, and his father Abdullah and his grandfather Abdul Muttalib was pretty much like a leader of Meccan society. Now, their clan was perhaps not the strongest, but it was very, very respected. It was one of the respected clans. In terms of strength, perhaps from what we hear, the strength was dwindling, it was not growing. But the Prophet ﷺ's grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, he was the custodian of the Kaaba, which was the central, most important building, theologically, religiously, but also you could even say politically at the time. That being the case, the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, was born into a family that had a good status. Like, he was not coming from, as he grew up, he did not have any, you know, types of feelings of inferiority or such. He was from the people, the Qurayshi people. He was one of them. So that's important to keep in mind. In fact, his grandfather, as the book discusses, was known to be a very brave man. And when the king from the Abraha from Yemen came to try to destroy the Kaaba, and the book refers to it, and this was an incident when Arab went and he defecated in the temple that Abraha had built in Yemen. And sources say that he had built this with the pure intention of rivaling the Kaaba. He was jealous of the amount of attention the Kaaba played. Now, when we're talking about Arabian Peninsula, we might think, okay, what's happening in the world around that time, and where's happening Arabia? Arabia really was not a significant role player in world history at the time. From what I've heard, they even said before this, the Prophet's coming, obviously centuries before, they said Alexander the Great, as he conquered from east to west, when you step towards the Arabian desert, and he goes, this is not worth it. So it's important that politically, geopolitically, it did not play a very central role. The major empires was the Sassanid Empire, the Persian Empire, and the Roman Empire. These were the main powers. And when we're saying the Persian, the Roman Empire, we're not just saying Rome and back in that days, Isfahan or Iran. These empires, they were constantly fighting, and the Arabs were feeling the wars. And in fact, the Quran refers to this. So Iraq was under Persia, whereas Sham, Syria was under the Roman Empire. So Arabia wasn't much. But within Arabia, there were things that were very important. Within the Arabian Peninsula, Kaaba was very significant. Arabs would come and perform the pilgrimage. Now, this was a custom that was there from the time of the Prophet Abraham. So, sorry, I'm just jumping, trying to build a bit of a context. So when the Prophet arrives in this situation, yes, we're talking about the King Abraha, because of he was aware of the attraction that the Kaaba was. He built a temple or a church to compete with this. And sources say that when one Arab had come to humiliate him, he had defecated in his temple. So he raised an army and he said, I'm going to go and squash Mecca, in particular the Kaaba. And as we know, it doesn't eventuate. And the Prophet's grandfather plays a very important role, Abdul Muttalib. And it's really a role that Muslim historians reflect on and says it's a story that teaches how to rely on God. What man needs to know, what befalls upon him, what are his duties, and what befalls on God. And the story says that as the elephants come, because it's an army with elephants, to march and literally flatten the Kaaba, Abdul Muttalib is called by the King Abraha, and he goes, what do you want? You're about to be defeated. He said, I heard you took some of my sheep. I want my sheep back. He said, I thought you were a very honorable man. Your whole city is about to be destroyed, and here you are begging for your sheep. He said, this house that I'm the custodian of, I do not own it. Its owner is God. It's his duty to protect it. My duty is my flock, my sheep. I'm there to protect my sheep. And this incident, this incident is very significant because the Quran talks about this. Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. This incident, the ashabul fil, the people of the elephant, when Abraham says to destroy it, it is recorded that miraculously the elephants were not able to march forward, and a flock of birds was sent by God, and they came with stones, pelting the army, and they were all destroyed, and the elephants just turned back. And from then onwards, Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's grandfather, plays a very significant role. I did not want to say this. I don't want to describe the chronological events of the Prophet's life. I just want to mention now some highlights. But my first one was that the Prophet Muhammad came from the Bani Hashim family, and they have a very significant role in Meccan politics. And they're one of the, you can say, the elite, but they're from the Meccan. It did not mean they're always the most richest. The Prophet, peace upon him, what we see in his early lifetime, he experiences tragedy after tragedy. His father passes away before he's born, and his mother passed away only when he's at the age of 6. And really, we have a vulnerable orphan. And this is very significant, and the book points to this, saying that it was required for the Prophet of God, if he's going to try to understand all human beings. There's a saying in Arabic, Man lam yadhuq lam ya'arif. He who does not taste something does not know it. So the Prophet, for him to really be able to reach out to his followers and understand them, particularly understand them in difficult times, how it is to be an orphan, how it is to be raised. Muslim scholars say he was made to go through all these different stages. So orphanhood, he felt doubly. He lost his father, he lost his mother, and after losing his mother, he even lost his custodian, Abdul Muttalib, his grandfather. So he really did feel that. From a spiritual angle, scholars say that this was made to happen so that he could learn and not really attach to the world, but really turn to God. Now, if there are some of our Christian viewers, they might remember, just like Jesus did not have a father, well, he did not have a biological father, in a way that helped him spiritually connect to God, as God played that role. The Prophet, we find a very similar story. He did have a biological father, but he was not really there. And the Qur'an, when God speaks to Prophet Muhammad, it refers to his life before prophethood. And he says, and did we not find you an orphan and looked after you? So this is significant. The Prophet, when we look at his life before prophethood and even after prophethood, we see him going through a lot of calamities. There's a hadith that the Prophet said, Al-Anbiya wa shaddul bala'an thumma al-amthal fal-amthal, that the prophets in Islam, in our understanding, is that they're the ones who are tested the most. In fact, you can even say the most number of difficulties, the calamities that come on anyone is first on prophets. Because the principle is those who are closer to God are tested more. So prophets are tested the most. And we see this definitely in the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he was known to have a smiling face, and he would always smile. But that smiling face does not mean there are years of difficulties, hardships, pain, and hurt. He was the smiling Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the one who said to smile because smiling is a charity. But he was also known as An-Nabi al-Mahzoon, the sad Prophet. His sadness was not a worldly sadness for his own self, but his sadness was some sort of a sacred, holy sadness where he could connect to people, sad perhaps being distant from God, sad perhaps the condition around him and not doing anything, those type of sadnesses. So Arabian society, it had its own politics, but it was sort of disconnected. Now, why would God send his prophet to a place that really had no significance? And one of the descriptions of the Prophet ﷺ is that he was an ummi. An ummi in Arabic means unlettered. Now, this is something Muslims grapple with. Well, the Quran says very clearly that if you knew how to write, then people would have doubted about this Quran. They would have said, he's writing it with his own right hand. So the Prophet ﷺ, the common answer that's given is that he could not read and write, and perhaps that was there for the Quran for people to fully believe in the Quran. Because if someone cannot, has never authored a book, how can he come up with a book that seems matchless till the end of times? One other explanation has been offered by the author of this book, and he says that the ummi is also, it comes from a root word which means something connected to the mother, something that's to do with the natural state. And the thing about our Prophet is that his natural state, what they say is the fitra, the natural disposition of the human being, was really preserved. And sometimes education enlightens people, but sometimes education, it really imprints the philosophies that exist at that time, the theologies, the political, the social trends. And God wanted to send a prophet that was free from all this, unaffected, pure, a natural state in his, as if just like the day he was born from his mother. And the Prophet, peace upon him, always had that natural state. And so that umminess of the Prophet plays a role. And perhaps him being born in Arabia, that's significant as well, because had he been born and raised in Isfahan or Rome, he would have been definitely affected by the politics and the philosophies of that time. And then human beings would not have been very sure what we're getting. Is this really a revelation from God, or was this something that was passed on or influenced by other things? But when we know the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whatever he says, it's pure revelation, whether it's in the form of Qur'an or in the form of hadith, or what's referred to as the Sunnah. This is significant. One thing that really stands out to me when the author is discussing Abu Talib. Now, so when the Prophet's grandfather passed away, his uncle Abu Talib looks after him. Now, Abu Talib is it's a very sensitive issue to discuss, because according to most Sunni Islamic sources, he does not convert to Islam. He protects the Prophet during his most difficult years, and he's like his guardian, because Arabian society was, everyone is protected by a clan. Abu Talib, assuming the leadership of the Bani Hashim, he protected the Prophet and he supported him in being a messenger of God and in calling out and preaching the oneness of God. And he prevented Mecca from him. But historical reports say that he did not utter what Muslims call the Kalimah Shahada until the last moment. So they're really, it's a very difficult situation, because there's someone so dear to the Prophet, and yet he does not become Muslim. One thing that's very interesting, a very small sentence was mentioned in this chapter that really, I really appreciate. It said, one thing that Abu Talib received was, as a response to this, for his efforts, was that his son, Ali bin Abi Talib, radiallahu anhu, one of the greatest saints, the greatest scholars, the greatest companions of Islam, of the Prophet ﷺ, his son, which would have been the Prophet's biological cousin and also a future son-in-law, he was destined to be the father of the Prophet's lineage. And in a way, Abu Talib has been rewarded by the very sacred, important position that was given to Ali, who the author says represents the Prophet's sainthood. Now, every Prophet has a messenger side to him, a risala component, and every Prophet also has a wilaya component to him, a sainthood side to him. They say that Hazrat Ali, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, represents the Prophet's sainthood. And also all the famous saints that come from the Prophet's family come from his lineage. So in a way, the author says Abu Talib was in a way rewarded. For human beings, everyone to follow the Prophet Muhammad will love Ali, because no one can love the Prophet and not love Ali. And everyone who loves Ali, who loves the Prophet, will naturally have a very, very soft position for Abu Talib, despite the fact that he did not convert to Islam. Now, of course, Sunni and Shia Muslims have a slight disagreement. Shia Muslims believe that he did, they refer to him, he did become Muslim. But I think that's to do with their theological belief that Sayyidina Ali is sinless and he must come from a sinless father. This doesn't exist in majority Islam, but it's still important. But it's I just wanted to highlight some unique things that in this chapter that we come across. We also find that the Prophet ﷺ engages in very peaceful initiatives. Now, this is all I'm talking about before his prophethood. There was an instance where they noticed, again, very significant, the Bani Hashim leads this initiative, the book says. They found that many people, Arabs who came to perform pilgrimage, often they were mistreated. Again, we said, in unjust societies, the weak, the traveler, the one who has no source of support, they're the ones that get mistreated. They were often mistreated, robbed in their business transactions. And so the Bani Hashim played a role in signing an agreement to stop this. if I'm not mistaken, it was referred to as the Hilf al-Fudul. And the Prophet, peace upon him, took a part in this. And he says, years later, during his prophethood, I took part in such a meritorious thing that if that was to take place again, it was in Abdullah bin Judan's house, that I would participate in it again, even after Islam. So he participates in that. Now, however, the most important thing, and I'll just finish it because it's not, we're running out of time. The Prophet ﷺ is known in his early life as being the trustworthy one. Now, his title was given Muhammad as-Sadiq al-Amin, the truthful one, the trustworthy one. This is of paramount significance, brothers and sisters. If you could say one characteristic that the Prophet ﷺ was known was his honesty. And even they say Yasir's father, Ammar, when he gets told that Yasir became a Muslim, his father says, he says, son, if Muhammad says God is one God, he is only one, because this man has never lied. This is so significant because the whole Prophet's 40 years of his life, it was there that he builds this trustworthiness and safety, and everyone trusts him in Mecca. This is very, very significant because a prophet, his character is meant to be impeccable, and particularly when it comes to truthfulness. If you could say that the Prophet's whole message he came, it was to preach one thing, is to not lie. Religion's essence is about confirming the truth, affirming the truth as the truth, and staying away from lying. Kufr in Islam is like equal to lying, kadhib. They both start with the Ku letter. And so the Prophet, peace upon him, his honesty and his truthfulness is really, really significant. I cannot stress this important. It's not just a good ethics that it's good to have. Once the Prophet, years later when he was a prophet, he said, is it possible for a Muslim to fornicate? Be overtaken by his desires? He says, yes, it's possible. It was asked, is it possible for a Muslim to steal? And he goes, yes, it is possible. It's possible because, humans are human. Sometimes the evil sides, their weaknesses can overcome them. And then the companion asked, O Messenger of God, is it possible for a Muslim to lie? And he stand up and he said, no, a Muslim cannot lie. A Muslim cannot lie. And he keeps repeating it. We look at these, our Prophet, brothers and sisters, to learn, obviously, to follow him. If we want to carry any message, whether it's to speak about Islam to others, or if we want to carry a message of peace or anything, the first thing we learn from our Prophet's life is to be someone of upright character and to be known for your truthfulness. Truthfulness is not only important in terms of others believing you, in terms of you setting a good life. If you speak truthfully, you will think truthfully. If you think truthfully, Muslim saints will say, you even will dream truthful dreams. Truthful dreams are dreams that come true. And dreams, the Prophet said, is like 1/46 of prophethood. And he said, in the end of times, those who are truthful will see true dreams. So it's a bit very difficult to summarize everything here, but I just want to mention this. The other main thing that we notice in this book, and again, I'll assume as you've read it, is that we find a few cases of certain people. Now, although there was not much news of, there were not many Christians in Mecca, there were a few, mainly elderly people who were reading. There were not many people that were well-read. There were Jews in Medina, because in their scriptures, they were waiting for a prophet. So they'd come to Medina, and in the chapter you see that Muslims will argue descriptions of the Prophet are given in the Bible and in the Old and New Testaments, all foretelling the Prophet ﷺ. And when he was asked, describe yourself, who are you? He said, I'm the one who Abraham prayed for, because in the Quran there's a prayer. Abraham says, oh God, send amongst them a messenger, or they'll teach them, as he leaves his children, his son Ishmael. And he said, I'm the one that Jesus gave the glad tidings to. But we find other cases, like in this first chapter that's discussed, people like Salman al-Farsi, a young Persian boy who travels around the world just trying to seek the truth. And in this story, we find that whoever really seeks and honestly, truthfully seeks, he will find. And eventually he comes and he finds the Prophet, peace be upon him, and he converts. There are so many sources that they're there that the early Christian in the Christian Bible and the Old and the New Testament that predict the Prophet ﷺ, that some of the biggest companions that converted to Islam were the rabbis of the Jews. For example, the famous Abdullah bin Salam, when he became a Muslim, the Prophet asked the other rabbis and the Jews of Medina, "What are your thoughts of Abdullah bin Salam?" They said he's one of the most learned amongst us. And then when he said, "What would you think if he converted to Islam?" And when he does, they get shocked. But then they say, "Oh no, he's not the learned, he's the most wicked amongst us." So what we find is we find individual cases of people that really search and they find. And there's a saying, you know, he who seeks shall find. Man talaba wajadda wajada. I guess I can maybe go a bit further more, but
MashaAllah, please, Sadeq, please go ahead further. MashaAllah, your speech flows like the river, just like you were describing the book. Please go ahead some more. We have some questions coming up, but we have like 5-10 minutes for you.
Okay, okay. Inshallah. Sorry, the time differences. It's 8:30 here in the morning, just to keep you. Now, one thing I just want to mention, now we mentioned that women were mistreated. There's a very significant event, and when our Prophet ﷺ, this event takes place, our Prophet ﷺ, you know, really sheds tears. And I just want to quote this incident just to understand that society. Years later, one of the companions who became Muslim tells of an incident where, because I said it was a source of shame for people to have a daughter born or many daughters born, they would often kill them. And this does not mean every woman in Arabia was killed, otherwise there would not have been any female Arabs. We know our Prophet married Khadija. And when we're speaking the negatives of Arabian society, it's important to understand, be a balanced approach. Yes, it was very bad, it was evil, but we did mention there were good aspects to it too. It's not being racist against Arabs when I'm saying this. Now, I'm someone from a Persian background myself. I'm from Afghanistan. My mother tongue was Farsi. In fact, just a small reflection about this book. My grandma, she passed away, but I remember reading this book in Farsi because for my parents, their English is not the first language. I heard that this book was printed in Farsi and I ordered it. And when we had the Farsi copy, it was 2 thick copies. It was called Nur-e Javedan, the light that continues. Infinite light, I guess. When I used to read it with my mum and my grandma, and I used to read it to practice the Farsi, it was very moving. I would often find my mum and my grandma in tears. And I think this book has been really, I find there's a lot of sincerity has been written in. And when I was even living in the Middle East, I saw some different scholars, famous, anyway, maybe he's asked not to mention his name, but a famous scholar, he's had his PhD in Islamic studies. He said that upon reading this book, I discovered certain secrets of the Seerah that I did not know before, or certain stories exist, but I did not know their name, and I came across the name of those individuals in this book. So it's a good book for a beginner to just read, understand the Prophet ﷺ, and it's there to intellectually understand how Muslims see the Prophet ﷺ, but also emotionally. But it's also good for the scholar, the one who has an eye for detail. Real subtle nuances are highlighted here that often you don't find elsewhere. I'm not a scholar myself, but I heard this from scholars. But one incident that took place was a companion describes how he killed his daughter. And let me quote from the book. He said, "O Messenger of God, I had a daughter. One day I told her mother to dress her, for I was taking her to her uncle. My poor wife knew what this meant. He was going to plan to kill her, but could do nothing but obey and weep. She dressed the girl, who was very happy that she was going to see her uncle. I took her near a well and told her to look down into it. While she was looking into the well, I kicked her into it. While she was rolling down, she was shouting, 'Daddy, Daddy, my father, my father.' When the Prophet ﷺ hears this story, they say his beard is soaking wet in tears. And he asked the companion to narrate this incident again, and for people to listen, just to see where they came from. And God says, you know, God is the one who brings believers from layers of darknesses. يُخْرِجُهُم مِّنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ The Prophet ﷺ is the best example. This incident really describes the situation of how the Arabian society was and the difference that our Prophet ﷺ brought. And this is very, very significant, because any society we find, we have the weak being crushed. For a Muslim, if they want to follow the prophetic message, doesn't matter where you are, in Australia, in America, you need to ask yourself, who are the weak in my society? The elderly? And unfortunately, I just want to mention, I'm going off topic, we're having our elderly being affected by this disease going around the world. And there are people out there, and it's not about any political group, and they're saying, some people are thinking, well, maybe this disease is sent by God so the elderly can be wiped off. They're a strain for the economy anyway. This is sometimes a type of belief we can look at the world when we are not guided by principles of faith, that we see the elderly as a burden for the economy. Some may have even said, let them die and let them sacrifice themselves for a stronger economy. The Prophet ﷺ, I just want to mention what he says about this, because this is very relevant to us today. He said, if it was not for those elderly whose backs are bent like this, you know, those really old people, he said, if it was not for people like them and the relationship they have with God, he said, calamities will come upon you like rain. It's the weak in society. The view of belief says this. This is what the Prophet taught society. That it's the weak in society that God puts blessings through them that society is looked after. Sometimes it's the animals that are praying to God that God keeps the society safe. It's the elderly that fully rely on God and they have no one else, that God blesses the elderly. I've had a grandma. When a grandma lives in your house, in your home, you feel what we say, the barakah, the blessings. The materialist mind will say, oh, this old person, she's going to die, and you know, let's maybe give her to somewhere else. But the belief says she's a source of barakah. By her being here, it's like rain will constantly come. This change in perspective is what the Prophet ﷺ brought when it comes to women, the elderly. And so we need to ask ourselves, what type of bad perspectives I may have. We need to look at the world not from the logic of the worldly logic. We need to look at it from a logic of spiritual logic, that our inner heart. What does the Prophet ﷺ say? That who are the weak in my society? How can I help them? If you want to follow the Prophet's mission, that's what it is, to identify the weak and help them and raise awareness about them and raise people's ethics. And ultimately, this is done because of a hereafter. We will be held accountable if we do not. Maybe I'll keep it at that, Attila, inshallah.
Well, thank you, Sadeq, for this beautiful speech. I know it's a Wednesday morning down there, and now we are approaching the iftar time on Tuesday. But one question that came was, what is the a Seerah book that you suggest to read beside the one that you mentioned? Any other Seerah books that you mentioned? And you were talking about an Infinite Light book in Persian, for example.
Yeah, that was a translation of this book, of this current book, The Infinite Light, The Messenger of God. There is a book by a famous scholar, a Syrian scholar who passed away, rahimahullah, Sayyid Ramadan Bhuti. He has a book where he narrates the Seerah incidents, the lifestyle, but he also analyzes it. And that's what we need these days. We don't just need the story retold. It's good to read the story, but also a bit of analysis. And this book provides that, but also that one. And I believe an English translation has come out. Ramadan Bhuti. The first Seerah book that I read, was it the first one? I'm not sure. But Martin Ling's biography of the Prophet is one of my favorites, to be honest. It's very written well. He has a great command of English, and it's very emotional. So when I think of my uni years, Martin Ling's book was very nice. And also there was a scholar, Yahya Emerick. These books I found really beneficial. But Seerah is something we can always refresh. So why limit to one? Let's read different books of Seerah every year. But these are some of the ones that I personally read and benefited from.
I see. The one question that came through social media was that, for example, it says, For example, the movie that was shot in the 80s, where Anthony Quinn was in the lead actor. In that movie, even it seems like our prophet went through many wars. Like it contains like 50% of his life. But Rashid Khailamaz makes a good point in that there is actually it's 99% of his life being social and being with the people. Like 1% is the war. What would you say on this? Could you elaborate on this, please?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, if you were to count the amount of time he actually spent on the battlefield of his 23-year mission, I believe they said the calculator will be about a day or less than a day in war. So it's very for a movie, war scenes are significant. Now those wars are very significant. We can't downplay the importance they played because people were really defending what they believed in. Those wars, if you notice, most of them are defensive wars. They're all fought around Medina. One, Badr, a few hours from Medina, not near Mecca. The next one, Uhud, on the mountains adjacent to Medina. Third one, Khandaq. They're not all shown in the movie. Trenches at the border of Medina. They were defending themselves. And it is good that our Prophet ﷺ fought wars. Why? Because he taught us how to fight wars, the ethics of wars. This is very, very significant. Now, what's interesting in the book is you find that a lot of predictions of the Prophet are quoted from the Old Testament. Many of these predictions, now, of course, our Christian audience or Christian scholars may have a different opinion about this prediction, but many of these predictions or prophecies that says the final prophet to come, he will come with a sword, he will fight wars. So this is a prophecy that's just being fulfilled. But yes, it is true that sometimes when you read Seerah, the wars are so much emphasized that it's as if that's all that took place, and that's not true. The Prophet really hated war and tried to avoid it as much as he could. He himself, he never directly killed anyone. Only one person, from what I heard, what I've read, he was injured and he later on died from the Prophet ﷺ. And you know, his whole series about forgiveness, but those battles are significant as well, I guess.
Well, thank you very much, Sadeq Ansari, for waking up early from Sahur.
I didn't wake up, I stayed up the whole night, so it's okay.
Wonderful, wonderful. And looking forward to having you once again, hopefully in this Seerah series every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time, walking in the footsteps of walking Quran, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Thank you again.
With a line of poetry.
Go ahead.
Often people ask, how much can we praise the Prophet? And there was a Egyptian scholar by the name Imam Busiri. He's written a very famous mantle poem about the Prophet. It's called Qasidat Busiri. What is the limit of praising the Prophet, and what's too much, what's too less?
Yes.
And he has a line of poetry. I just want to quote that. He says, دعمت دعته النصارى في نبيهم واحكم بما شئت فيه مدحا واحتكمي. That leave what the Christians said about their prophet. Don't call a prophet that is, do not deify him, do not make him a god. But anything other than that, feel free to say, because he is fully deserving and of that. And his own companion Hassan ibn Thabit, he was recorded to have said, وَمَا مَدَحْتُ مُحَمَّدًا بِمَقَالَتِي وَلَكِنْ مُدِحَتْ مَقَالَتِي بِمُحَمَّدٍ. That I did not praise Muhammad sallallahu by my words, but by me praising the Prophet, my words became praiseworthy. So his name is Ahmad, the most praised one. Ahmad, his name, sallallahu the most praised one, but also Ahmad, the one who praises God the most. He was someone who constantly was in prayer and used to constantly praise God and thank God and do everything in God's name. Just wanted to finish with that. Thank you very much.
One thing that came, could be the last question. Now we still have some time. When the Jews you mentioned came to Medina, did they come for the purpose of looking for the Prophet? That was heralded to them.
That's what Islamic sources say, that they were there waiting for a prophet, expecting the prophet to come there. And many Christian monks at the time were telling the Arabs that, look, something is going to come in a city. Salman al-Farsi, even in his adventures, was told that it's a city of date palms. That's what Islamic sources says. Otherwise, normally Jews, what were Jews doing in Arabia was not really a significant place. They sort of stayed away from Mecca because of the idol worshipping there, but they were there in Medina.
Was there a mention of a refusal, of their reason for refusal to accept the Prophet?
Well, I think one of it that was mentioned in general, even the Meccans in general, sometimes this tribalism takes place if it's not from their tribe that they were expecting. I think Jews may have a belief that the final person will come from Isaac's lineage, and our Prophet was from Ismail. But the Arabs had the same issue. The Quraysh said he's from this tribe, he's from Bani Hashim and from Bani Makhzum, and they didn't want to. So sometimes arrogance, not wanting to know about him, prevents us. And one key theme that the book really emphasizes that you do not love someone if you do not know them. So to get to know someone, to love someone, you have to know about them. That is the only way. So the Prophet, peace upon him, sometimes people knew about him, but sometimes because of their arrogance and attitudes, that prevented him from seeking the truth.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Sadeq, for this beautiful round. Looking forward to having you once again in this Seerah series every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you, Sadeq.
Jazakallah khair. Salam alaikum. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.